On today's episode, Mike Folta from the Rockford IceHogs broadcast booth joins the show to talk everything you need to know about the IceHogs' late season surge and their upcoming first round playoff series with the Grand Rapids Griffins.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2, and make sure to also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account as well at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Very excited to be having back on the show here today none other than Rockford IceHogs broadcaster Mike Folta. Mike, a lot has gone down since we last talked. I believe it was in mid-January. The IceHogs went on a nice late season surge, and they now got a playoff date starting in just over 48 hours time from now against the Grand Rapids Griffins. We'll get to that series and the IceHogs hot run late in the year here in just a second. But Mike, first, just want to say thank you very much for your time. I know I appreciate it. My listeners and viewers out there do as well. How have things been going for you since we last spoke in mid-January, my friend?
Oh, it's been great. I mean, last January, that was kind of the calm right before the storm, because you can pretty much point to a spot in the calendar in early February when the IceHogs started getting pretty darn hot and finished out the year really strong as one of the AHL's best teams. So we've been having fun on that side, and here in Rock Vegas, the weather's heating up a little bit. We've got some great golf courses out here. So while we're sitting around waiting and idle for our game one to start on Saturday night, we've been hitting the links as well. So it's been fun.
Love to hear that. I actually just got my first round in this year as well over the weekend. So hopefully more of this good weather can continue on for us. And hopefully the IceHogs will be able to keep up what they were doing at the end of the regular season, Mike, as we referenced. Rolling hot into the Calder Cup Playoffs, winners of 23 of their final 30 games. And yeah, I actually went and checked the date log. We last spoke on January 18th. And as you mentioned, once the calendar flipped to February, it was like all systems go for this IceHogs bunch. So I'm just curious, what did you kind of notice during the IceHogs during those final 30 games that led to all this success? What do you kind of attribute to that?
Yeah, I think there's several big things. One of them being Jaxson Stauber really started to find a groove. He set an IceHogs record with 13 consecutive wins. And in some of those games, he maybe wasn't his best and his team just picked up the W. But in some of those games, Stauber stole the game and was fantastic. So his emergence and kind of, getting on track in the wins column, talking with our goaltending development coach, Matt Smith, he thought that a lot of the foundational pieces to what Stauber was doing were there from the start of the year. Things just kind of started to fall into place more in February, and then he went on that run. Another thing, the team just started playing really sound defensively. This IceHogs team has turned into one of the top 10 defensive teams in the American Hockey League. They weren't always that, but they certainly started to become that in February. They opened up February with a couple of overtime or shootout losses, and then actually on the night that we honored Corey Crawford, that was when Jaxson Stauber started his win streak. We retired Corey Crawford's number 29 here in Rockford. Stauber allows just one goal in a 2-1 victory, and then he goes on a 13-game heater. So it's kind of a little poetry there, if you will. And then we got some help from the Blackhawks as well. Guys like Lukas Reichel have come down since we've last spoken. He came down earlier in February, and then late in the year for the last game of the season as well. Zach Sanford, who the Blackhawks picked up on waivers from the Arizona Coyotes, he's come down and made a difference. And probably none more than Rem Pitlick. Pitlick was acquired on a trade from the Pittsburgh organization for the low price of a 2026 7th-round pick. It doesn't seem like a lot, but that trade has kind of sent shockwaves throughout, our team and throughout the Central Division, truthfully, because since he has come down to Rockford and played in the American Hockey League with the IceHogs after his brief stint with Chicago in the NHL, he's been the leading scorer in the league. So he was the leading scorer on Wilkes-Barre Scranton when he was in the AHL in the Pittsburgh organization, and he's come over and been a part of a top line between him, Cole Guttman, and Brett Seney that is literally the best line in the AHL scoring-wise.
A lot of good stuff there to dissect, but I first want to ask you about Jaxson Stauber. As you referenced, he's been playing outstanding, and not only did he go on that huge 13-game winning streak in goal, also scored a goal of his own during that process, I want to say, which was fun to see. But talk to me a little bit about Jaxson Stauber, because he kind of finds himself in a little bit of an interesting situation, right? I would say you mentioned that the kind of the base was there for Stauber earlier in the season or all year long, but wasn't really getting the results till the end of the year. Now, obviously, he's got a playoff run ahead of him, but I'm just curious your thoughts as to whether you think Stauber has done enough to get a contract extension as an RFA. And given, Arvid Soderblom kind of struggled a bit throughout the majority of this year at the NHL level, the Blackhawks have a variety of options and a variety of different ways they could go about things with their backup spot next year. So I'm just curious, have you seen the progression necessary out of Stauber to not only get another contract, but maybe give Chicago some confidence that he could possibly contend with Arvid Soderblom for that backup job next year? Because it seems like that could be in the cards potentially.
Yeah, and I kind of tried to broach the subject with him. I was interviewing him for an article that we wrote, and I mentioned the goalie goal that he scored back on February 16th. So he wins his first game of the 13-game win streak the weekend before. The next weekend, he gets his first pro shutout and scores a goalie goal. Now, the goalie goal is just, it's kind of novelty, right? Like you can't account for these things. It's more fun than anything. But I asked him, like, you got a lot of notoriety for that night, and that kind of set you on this path that you've been on throughout the second half of the year. Have you felt like the potentially career-changing, pivot point that those couple of weeks were possibly for you? And he was very deflective towards that, and he is very much in the moment right now for this playoff run with Rockford. If you think back to last season, Arvid Soderblom, he started the last 7 games of the regular season for Rockford, including all 3 games of a 3-3 on the last weekend of the regular season. So Stauber didn't get any playing time in crunch minutes for Rockford. Now he is, and he's playing in big games for the IceHogs down the stretch. He's really savoring that. And let's also not forget last year, he went up for a short stint with the Blackhawks in the NHL.
Yeah.
And went 5-1 on a lottery team. And now that's not a huge sample size, but he showed an ability to win at the National Hockey League and win on a team that really wasn't very good. And even in his one loss, that was probably his best game of the bunch up there last year. So I think the steps he's taken from a developmental standpoint this year have finally started to connect for him. Mentioning earlier in the year when he kind of wasn't getting bounces, his first game of the year, he saw 49 shots. It was a 7-2 loss. I mean, the team just didn't look very good in front of him. That's a tough one for your stat line to start the year off on, right? And then he had another game a few weeks later in November where his mask had come loose, which you're supposed to stop play when that happens, right? Well, the ref didn't see it, and Stauber's standing there holding his mask in his hand, trying to get the attention of the officials, and a Texas Star player comes in and shoots the puck into the net, and he gives up a goal that way, and we end up losing that game. So there were kind of these weird things that happened that went against him in the first half of the year, and then obviously, he righted the ship in the second half. And I can't go into all the minutia and the technical aspects of his changes, but I know from speaking with him and with our development coach Matt Smith that he's really been working on his depth in the crease and letting things come to him and being patient in net, and that's worked for him a lot.
Yeah, it's nice to see Jaxson Stauber kind of find that groove down in Rockford. And it's funny that you mentioned that little stint that he had up in the NHL with the Blackhawks last season. I still get people from time to time in my YouTube comment sections or DMing me like, hey, what about Jaxson Stauber? What are we thinking about him? Looked good for the Blackhawks last year. And my response would be, yeah, but we haven't really seen the consistency at the AHL level yet. We finally have gotten that. And I personally think Jaxson Stauber has already done enough to get himself a contract this upcoming summer. We'll see if the Blackhawks wind up feeling the same way. I do also want to talk about Drew Commesso, though, for a second, because even though Jaxson Stauber is rightfully so getting the limelight right now for the way that he's been playing, still a pretty darn good first pro season out of Drew Commesso with the save percentage above 900, goals against well below 3. Talk to me about what you saw out of Drew in his first professional year as well.
I think the most impressive part about Drew's season is the way that he, as a 21-year-old, mind you, has kind of been able to bounce back here in pro year number one. At the start of the year, just a couple of weeks in, he gets his first pro shutout. He becomes the youngest IceHogs goalie ever to record a shutout. And then things kind of, when we last were speaking, at the end of December and into January, things weren't going that well for him. There were a couple of games in a row where it felt like, he wasn't having horrible games, but there was maybe a goal here or a goal there that he would want back. And he has found a way to fight out of that and become really consistent down the stretch. Where Jaxson Stauber's on a 13-game win streak, Comesso necessarily hasn't won all of his games these last couple of months, but he's looked really good and been not as much results driven. I think these two goalies are both process driven right now, which is good for young guys. But there was a point earlier in the year where he had lost 5 in a row, and talking to him and kind of hearing him having other conversations in the hallway, I kind of overheard him once say, I've never lost 5 in a row in my career, in my life. Like, this guy was at the national program, right? He's leading Boston University to a Frozen Four, and all of a sudden, things are kind of bouncing against him, so to speak, in the AHL. And he found a way to reverse that course, and he's been really solid down the stretch. And I'm not in charge of coaching decisions. I can't speak to that, but I mean, we rotated goalies almost religiously all year, and I'd be surprised if we didn't do that in the playoffs.
Well, that's good to hear that Drew was able to kind of right that ship a little bit, because, you're going to get tested like that in your first professional year. You're going to go through situations that you've never found yourself in, and to be able to overcome that or adversity and still put together a really solid campaign as a whole was certainly impressive to me from afar. Mike, you also referenced a huge difference in the IceHogs late in the year was becoming a really good defensive team. And that's kind of music to my ears, thinking about the guys that the IceHogs are icing on the back end on a nightly basis. Young players like Ethan Del Mastro, Wyatt Kaiser goes and joins the team, Louis Crevier going back and forth. He's going to be with Rockford, obviously, for the playoffs as well. Nolan, Allan hopefully will be healthy, but in the midst of his first professional campaign as well. What did you really notice about a lot of these youngings on the back end for the IceHogs? Did they kind of I don't want to say overcome, but get through that early wave of kind of figuring out the schedule and really kind of come together as a whole unit?
Yeah, I think the young guys were actually good from the very start of the year. Like, we saw Ethan Del Mastro and Nolan Allan on Rockford's top pair, if you want to call them that, in game one essentially, and they were both playing in every situation as well since the start of the year. So those guys have been thrown into the fire, and both of them, Allan and Del Mastro, have been amazing for us. We named Ethan Del Mastro our rookie of the year, and we named Nolan Allan our defenseman of the year. And so whoever we throw out there on our back end, if Nolan Allan's in the lineup, then 5 out of our 6 defensemen will have played in the National Hockey League. And if he's not in the lineup, because he is out with a lower body injury right now, if he's not in the lineup, then probably all 6 of our defensemen will have played in the NHL. So it's been fun to watch them. Wyatt Kaiser, when he first came down, it took him a bit to kind of get used to the AHL, because it is a different league, right?
Sure.
It's still a fast league, but not everything is tape to tape, and it's different than the NHL, where there's a better flow to it for sure. I think most players would agree on that. And so you saw him take a couple weeks to really start to make strides in his progression. And then once he found that groove, I mean, there were more nights than not where he was our best player, if not our best defenseman on the ice. So having him in the lineup has been huge for us when we have had him. And then, Crevier and Phillips have primarily been playing together. And when those two guys are out there, that's a lot of reach. And so it's very difficult for teams to operate defensively. And then if Phillips wants to jump into the rush, that's another element to his game that teams have to be ready for as well.
And for Ethan Del Mastro, obviously his first year at the professional level, gets named to the AHL All-Star game, a good offensive season as well. And I believe he also was getting some time on his offside at points, right? Like they were doing for Nolan Allan. Did I see that correctly?
It was primarily Allan who was playing his offside, but we've seen Del Mastro, it doesn't seem to bother, either one of the young guys.
Okay.
I think I asked both of them about it at the start of the year, and they both kind of shrugged it off as not like it wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't something that they were overly concerned about. And we've seen the IceHogs use Del Mastro. I don't want to say exactly similar to a guy who just signed, Alex Vlasic, but a guy who maybe profiles as more of a defense first defenseman in the NHL, getting a lot of touches on the power play and really feeling the puck at the AHL level to be able to be confident with those puck moving decisions. I'm not trying to put a capacitor on Del Mastro because he's shown he can do it all at this level, but it'll be fun to watch him in the NHL as we got to see already this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Big news coming out of Chicago today with Alex Vlasic signing that 6-year extension. But I do, want to ask about some sorts of comparisons between the two, because it feels like they're kind of on the same track, with Ethan obviously being a couple of years behind Alex. But we saw Vlasic in the AHL for a majority of last season, getting those top pairing minutes. And as you alluded to, kind of being used in puck moving situations, getting some opportunities. I remember he was, if I remember correctly, my memory hopefully still works well these days, but I think he was quarterbacking the IceHogs power play in the playoffs last year. And you don't exactly picture Alex Vlasic as an offensive defenseman. That's not what he was drafted to be. But I think it's been really, really well done by the organization to put guys like that in those situations to get progression in those areas. And we've seen Alex Vlasic this year at the NHL level. Look, he only had 16 points, but just the way that he went about it and his skating and how confident he looked in himself in those areas, I think there's certainly more upside in his offensive game than at least I envisioned when the Blackhawks initially drafted Alex Vlasic. And I feel like there's been developments in the same areas for Ethan Del Mastro since he's been drafted by the Blackhawks as well. And do you kind of see the similar comparisons between those two in sort of a sense that Ethan Del Mastro is kind of being vetted to be in the AHL fully this season with the potential to possibly go up to the NHL level next year, a la what Alex Vlasic just did, is kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think there's comparisons. I think one thing that has been evident, not just with the Blackhawks, but, with development in the AHL, is that it's really hard to over-ripen. It's almost, if your NHL club's not in a hurry, then there's no harm in getting more puck touches, in getting more points, in being in more late game intense scenarios in the American Hockey League before you make that jump. And so like Vlas spent a lot of time here, in Rockford. And like you were saying, he was on that top power play unit where he was moving the puck quickly and things like that. And even if he doesn't maybe profile to do that, with the Blackhawks immediately, it's still good for him to feel the puck and be able to, snap it quickly once he does get to the NHL. And maybe it's not on the power play, but it's breaking it out of the zone. And I think, especially in today's NHL, every defenseman, even the defensive ones, have to be able to start the breakout and have to be able to make that first pass. And even if it's a simple play, be able to do it with authority. And we've seen Del Mastro, and Allan both do that pretty well. And one thing that they'll both do well also is make a move in the offensive zone and have the confidence to do that at the blue line. And we've seen it where Del and Al will make a play like that. And if you have a defenseman who can make one guy miss, then you have a power play in the offensive zone. And their ability to kind of break guys down, moving the puck, has led to more than one Rockford goal this year.
And then on the offensive side of things, Mike, you talked about Rem Pitlick obviously being a huge addition since he's been sent down to Rockford. A guy that he's had a lot of success with, Cole Guttman, unfortunately a little banged up at the end of the year. I know a lot of people are going to be curious as to maybe his status or if there's any intel you could share with us about whether we're going to be seeing Cole sometime sooner rather than later, or just kind of his status going into this series with Grand Rapids.
Yeah, we anticipated him being out a few weeks when he was actually injured against Grand Rapids earlier in April. So he's been skating. He's dealing with that upper body injury, so he's been skating. That's a good thing. Still a little ways away. I don't anticipate him playing in game one, but we're hoping to have him back for later in the series. But he's been dynamic. It's interesting. His first few games back down with Rockford, Cole Guttman, I'm speaking of. Didn't have a ton going offensively. Still was creating and still was playing well in the offensive end. And he's been solid defensively as well, but just wasn't producing. And then he gets kind of going with Rem Pitlick a little bit, and Pitlick's arrival bolstered our top line. And I'm not saying that Guttman's production was all thanks to Pitlick by any means, but you could tell that when you add one guy to the lineup, it kind of slots everybody down, and all of a sudden there's more depth throughout. And Guttman, you could see his confidence pick up too. He's really feeling the puck well, and he had a crazy March for us at 22 points in 12 games. He was the player of the month, the first Ice Hog to win that award since 2015. So big end of the year for Gutty, and good to see him kind of get his legs going, because I know he had the first goal of the year, right, in Chicago against Pittsburgh. And we're like, all right, hopefully he's up there to stay. And he ended up, coming back down to us and having a big impact.
Hopefully we'll be able to get back on the ice sometime soon for that playoff series against Grand Rapids. Also got to ask about Nolan Allan as well, kind of similar in terms of a timeline as Cole Guttman. Yes.
Al's dealing with a lower body injury, and so he's been out these last couple of weeks. Him and Del Mastro have played in every game until the injury knocked Al out. But we're hoping again him back, maybe later in this series, which could span a couple of weeks. But again, I would not be expecting him to be out there for game one coming on Saturday.
Okay, let's get into the series, though, against the Grand Rapids Griffins, kicking off on Saturday night at the BMO. This is a matchup that we had seen 12 times during the regular season, Mike, and interestingly enough, they split them right down the middle. The IceHogs won 6, the Griffins won 6. But I got to ask, what did you kind of notice, if anything, out of all of those matchups between these two teams? Was there something in particular about Grand Rapids style or just these battles as a whole that caught your eye that you're looking at going into this series?
Well, it's funny because to me, the skeleton of this season series has always fit that of a playoff series, where it is going to be a muck it out type game. You're going to have to get some greasy goals. There is not going to be a lot of available. There's going to be some one and dones in the offensive zone before you're tracking back on the back check. And then in these last few weeks, when teams are battling for a position and you're really starting to get that playoff feel, then it started to feel like, okay, these are actually playoff games here, and they're not just messy games and yucky games, but now they're also physical and they've got bite to them. And it's not exactly Tampa, Florida, but like, man, there's some serious edge to this. And so I think in the physicality department, GR, they're a very young team as well. A lot of young Detroit prospects. Marco Kasper, a former first rounder. Simon Edmondson, he's going to be up in the NHL for years to come. He's a former first-round pick as well. You have Jonathan Berggren, who's back down with them. He was up with Detroit towards the end of their season. He's a phenomenal player, an elite player at our level. So they have a lot of high-end guys who are going to be with the Red Wings in years to come. And, Wings being a couple years ahead of the Blackhawks, right, in their rebuild. So they're coming from a similar posture as the Hawks. But they have some high-end skill guys, but I anticipate some low-scoring games. We've had excellent games between Rockford and GR. Almost always separated by no more than 2 goals. One thing I've noticed is that when the IceHogs can kind of, I don't say push around GR, but when we can rattle them a little bit and maybe get under their skin a tad, I feel like it kind of tilts things in the IceHogs' favor. And so, hopefully I'm not giving any bulletin board material here. I hope to see Rockford, really be hard and be physical, because I think we've shown that we can handle maybe some of the ebbs and flows a little bit better than they can.
And we haven't talked about Lukas Reichel yet, obviously joining the Rockford IceHogs for these Calder Cup playoffs. Played in 10 games with Rockford here late in the season, probably, back in September, October. I'm sure he didn't envision himself going back to Rockford and was hoping that he had kind of turned that corner and become a full-time NHLer, but goes back down there, has 8 points in 10 games, and then kind of similar to what he did at the end of the 2022-2023 campaign, goes back up to the Blackhawks and looks like a little bit of a different player. He's playing with that intensity, that speed through the neutral zone and in transition, a lot of high hockey IQ passing plays. I know he's only played with this group for 10 games this year, but he's been down in Rockford and familiar with a lot of guys on this roster and played with them a bunch over the years. Talk to me about how big it is getting a guy like Lukas Reichel into this lineup and also coming off of some confidence based on what he did at the end of the NHL season.
Yeah, he pops. I mean, I would say with him, probably Jonathan Berggren on the GR side, and maybe Edvinsson on the Grand Rapids side as well. Those are probably three players in this series where you look at them on the ice and you notice immediately, even if you don't know hockey, you think like, wow, those guys are different. Like they move different. The game changes when the puck is on their stick. And with our team, we have a ton of skill. Look at guys like Cini and Pitlick, who have been some of the best scorers in the league these last couple months. A David Gust, who's an elite scorer at this level as well. A lot of skill in this lineup, and there's plenty of speed, but Reichel brings that game-breaking speed, right? I mean, we saw in the last game of the season against the LA Kings, that was like the quintessential Lukas Reichel goal right there.
Yep.
And so I know that our head coach Anders Sorensen has been saying like, yeah, you can create here, but we also want you to shoot. Like, let's not forget, he's got an unreal shot, especially at the American Hockey League level. And we want him to go to the net and score goals too. We know he can create, and he has done that here. But we're looking for him to not just drive the play, but to shoot the puck as well.
And then I do want to ask, we've obviously seen a lot of Blackhawks prospects signing ATOs. Samuel Savoie has been reassigned to the team as well. Just a lot of guys being around that pro scene, getting a little bit of a glimpse of the action. Do you anticipate Paul Ludwinski or any of these guys getting in any playoff games? To me, it seemed like maybe Ludwinski would be the one based on him getting 2 games at the end and maybe being a little bit more seasoned for this game. And he also joined the IceHogs late last year as well. Do you see any of that happening or not really sure?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I think it's a possibility for sure, right? Like last year we saw Jalen Lipin get tossed into our playoff series against Texas, and he played 3 playoff games for us and looked pretty good coming right out of juniors. And he did that without playing any regular season games for us as well. And he was also the smallest guy on the ice by 15 pounds. So, and he's had a great year for us. But that just kind of goes to show that, based on the lineup needs, I don't think our staff or the group is scared to throw anybody in. I shouldn't say that. We're scared to throw one of these guys in per se. We've seen Ludwinski and the pace that he plays with. That's extremely noticeable to his game, his pace and his motor as well. Yeah. I think once he feels out the pro game and kind of gets maybe some more of that sensory awareness going, I think he'll be a really big impact player, hopefully for us and then for the Blackhawks. But it's tough to say as far as lineup. I'm not privy to that here a couple days out, but I would not be surprised if we do. But if you look at our lineup right now, we could have 18, 19 NHL contracted players out of 20 in our lineup. I think Jackson Cates, he's on an AHL deal with us. And then, depending on the health of our defense, it could be everybody, maybe with the exception of Austin Strand, he's on an AHL deal, but almost everybody else is on an NHL contract with the Blackhawks or has signed an ATO. So I wouldn't be surprised, but there's a lot of bodies for us here at Rockford right now.
Last but certainly not least, before I let you go and get on out of here, Mike, I know you got a little bit of bias here, but I can't let you jump on off the show without a little bit of a series prediction as to what we're going to see in the first round between the IceHogs and the Grand Rapids Griffins.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, I'm employed by the team, right? So I'm not going to pick Grand Rapids, that's for sure. But I will say, like, the Hogs are the 3 seed, right? And Grand Rapids is the 2 seed. So GR has home ice advantage. However, the Hogs get to start the series at home, which in my opinion is a huge advantage to be the lower seed and to start the series at home. And then games 2 and 3 are on the road. So it's pretty easy to talk yourself into like being able to win this at game 4, in Rockford here, not this weekend, but next weekend. The Hogs have to get out to a good start. They've been a pretty even split. You look at our home road splits this year, the records are almost identical between playing at home and playing on the road. We're actually better playing on the road in this series specifically. I believe we've won 4 of our 6 games against Grand Rapids at Van Andel Arena in GR. And I think the Griffins are having a pig roast ahead of game 3. They're like roasting a pig or something out in the parking lot before their second home game of the series, which is like, all right, we got that. We can't roast a Griffin because those don't exist, but you can tell they're pulling out all the stops in GR. I would love to see the Hogs get one here in game 1, steal one on the road, and then you have a chance to win on home ice in game 4. I don't know. I think this series is going 5, though. That's the prediction I'm going to hand out. I think these teams are really evenly matched. Both sides play well enough on the road to win a road game in this series. And, they have a 6'7" former first-round pick in net, Sebastian Cossa. He's been really good as in his first full year in the AHL. My pick is this is going 5. Hogs in 5. How about that?
I actually had the Hogs in 5 as well. I think it's only fitting with how close the regular season matches have been if this one could go 5. But I did kind of notice that when looking at the scheduling for the AHL playoffs, I saw the IceHogs had home ice for game 1, and I'm like, did I read it wrong? Did they sneak out the 2 seed? But no, it's just the structuring of how they do the Calder Cup playoffs. And I saw that, and I was like, that's a huge opportunity right off the gate for the IceHogs as they take game 1. You go and split in Grand Rapids, which is really just kind of your goal in the playoffs on the road for those 2 games. You go and split, you'll have an opportunity to come back in Rockford and close things out in game 4. So I think with that being the structure of the scheduling, game 1 is going to be really, really crucial for Rockford. So hopefully they'll be able to bring their best stuff when things open up on Saturday night. Mike, I really do appreciate all your time and your insight for joining the show and letting us know everything that we need to be looking out for all throughout what's hopefully a very long and successful run in the Calder Cup playoffs for the Rockford IceHogs. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Tune in to game 1 Saturday. It's going to be a fun one. We've had some great crowds at the BMO Center this year. Our attendance is up like 500 over last year, which is a big deal in a barn that seats 6,200, right? And so we're anticipating a pretty big crowd on Saturday, and we know it's going to be loud.
Love that. And I've been telling all my listeners on my end, make sure to go and purchase AHL TV for the Calder Cup playoffs if you're not in the area and not able to watch. I've done it the last 2 years. Really good bang for your buck. And it's an easy way to be able to tune in and watch a lot of hopefully notable Blackhawks players in the future all throughout the Calder Cup playoffs. And you get to listen to Mike calling all of these games. So, Mike, thank you again. We'll let you get on out of here. Everyone out there who's tuning in and watching or listening to this, make sure to go and follow Mike on X as well at Mike_Folta so you can be all caught up all throughout the Calder Cup playoffs.